Okay, hello everyone. Why don't we say our blessing for immersing ourselves in words of Torah, which ends with the words Lasok b'divrei Torah. Lasok is to be completely surrounded with, b'divrei are words, and Torah, of course, is the entirety of our tradition. Yadadai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yadadai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי תורה. הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה. ידעי-די-די-די-די. ידעי-די-די-די-די-די. ידעי-די-די-די-די-די. ידעי-די-די-די-די. This week, we are diving into the book of Exodus. Last week, we finished Genesis. And as we dive into Exodus, we also are going back to the book of Isaiah, of our prophets, which has so many different ethical texts mixed in with it. So let me share my screen so that we can all look at this text sheet together. Okay, and there's a couple of interesting things just to point out for this week. You notice that our verses are in a clump right here. So it's Isaiah 27:6 to 28:13. And then there's two verses that are added on to the end. Now, there's a variety of reasons as to why this might take place. Very often, if the verses that we're reading have a theme and don't end on a high note, on something called a nechemta, then we need verses to serve as that nechemta. The idea is that sometimes our texts deal with some very hard and complicated things, sometimes very, very hard and complicated things, but that we want them to end with the feeling of hope. That at the end of the day, to be a Jew is to be an optimist. To be a Jew is to believe in something that is better in the future. And so our text portions that are picked out, no matter what they contain, always include this little remnant of hope at the end. And these last two verses serve in this manner. And we'll also pick up on some of the themes earlier in the text. Are there any questions about that before we actually look at the text and dive into Isaiah itself? Okay, so let's look at Isaiah, and please feel free to unmute. I can only see 4 people at a time, but certainly everyone's questions and thoughts are always welcomed and appreciated. So if I don't see you and you want to jump in, just unmute and please do so. So if we remember, Isaiah is a book of about 40 chapters, and the prophecy began at a really, really interesting time in Jewish history. Because if we remember, there's the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom that became split in the 10th century BC. And in 742 BCE, when Isaiah's prophecy began, it was not only the year in which King Uzziah of Judah had died, which is in the southern kingdom, but it was also 3 years after the death of King Jeroboam of Israel in the north. So it was really a time of a lot of turmoil and upheaval within the Jewish world. Not only that, the reason for some of this was that the power of the Assyrians was greatly expanding. And during the 40 years of Isaiah's prophecy, the Assyrians would destroy the northern kingdom. So Isaiah believed, as many of our prophets did, that when something like that happened, it was often at least partially a result of poor actions and decisions made by the Jewish people. That if we as a Jewish people would act in ways that were moral, that followed God, that allowed us to walk in God's ways, then we would have a better future going forward. So when we're moving to our portion today, it's already a good of a way into the book of Isaiah. We're starting with chapter 27, but we understand this to be a time of incredible upheaval as the Assyrians really are in a very powerful position, and as the northern and southern kingdom are going through a whole lot. So with that, let's look at our Hebrew. Let's just start reading through it. This is definitely a longer Haftarah portion than the past couple have been. You'll notice that. We're not going to focus necessarily on every single word, but we certainly are going to be picking out themes and some of the ways in which the language of the text can give us deeper insight into its ultimate meaning. So would anyone like to read this text? Is this big enough for everyone? Do you want me to make it a little bigger? It's okay? Okay, would anyone like to just read? You don't have to read this whole piece, but some of it. Oh,
Sure.
Frank, are you on? Okay. Who is that?
That's
Rabbi
Catherine.
Catherine. Thank you so much.
It is I. Okay, you want to start right at 6?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Okay, hang on while I get something in bigger print.
Oh, I can make this bigger.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, so much better.
Good.
Okay. In days to come, Jacob shall strike root, Israel shall sprout and blossom, and the face of the world shall be covered with fruit. Was he
okay? So pause for just 1 second. I'm sorry. I just want you to pay attention to the words that are used here. We're going to talk more about this in a second, just how much botanical symbolism factors in here. Okay, because we're going to see it throughout this text. Keep going, Rabbi Catherine.
Was he beaten as his beater has been? Did he suffer such slaughter as his slayers? Assailing them with fury unchained, his pitiless blast bore them off on a day of gale. Assuredly, by this alone shall Jacob's sin be purged away. This is the only price for removing his guilt, that he make all the altar stones like shattered blocks of chalk. Need to move it up.
Yeah.
Please. With no sacred post left standing, nor any incense altar. Thus fortified cities lie desolate, homesteads deserted, forsaken like a wilderness. Their calves grave, there they lie down and consume its boughs. When its crown is withered, they break. Women come and make fires with them, for they are a people without understanding. That is why their maker will show them no mercy. Their creator will deny them grace. And in that day, the Lord will beat out the peoples like grain, from the channel of the Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt, and you shall be picked up one by one, O children of Israel. And in that day, a great ram's horn shall be sounded, and the strayed who are in the land of Assyria, and
Assyria.
the expelled, Assyria, thank you. And the expelled who are in the land of Egypt shall come and worship the Lord on the holy mount in Israel.
Okay, thank you so much for reading all of that. It's a lot of text. What do you notice from this text that we just read?
Whatever you did, you really messed it up, because if the maker is knowing you no mercy and the creator denies you grace, it's like, where is God?
Yeah, so there's some harsh punishment going on in this text, right?
It sounds like poetry to me for some reason.
Yeah, Isaiah can be very poetic. You're absolutely right. The wording, it kind of goes back and forth, but the wording is very thoughtful in Isaiah. And we're going to see much more examples of that poetry later in the text as well, Irv. That's absolutely right.
He also uses a lot of metaphor.
Oh, yeah, big time.
So what metaphors do you notice?
Well, like I'm looking right now in verse 9, did he make all the altar stones like shattered blocks of chalk, with no sacred post left standing nor any incense altar?
Okay, so what is he getting across with that metaphor there?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, it's
But it does start off very positive. Right? I mean, it starts off
Yeah.
really positive and then goes to that. So.
right. It starts off really positive. Also at the end, it will become positive as well. So it kind of alternates between harsh text and words of hope.
Well, we've seen a lot of that in our study of Isaiah and of some of the other prophets, that they mix in a little. They always start with hope, give you the problem, and then end with some hope.
Yeah, they might all do that a little bit different than one another, but there is a combination. Some of them start with doom and gloom and then get to hope, right? But that there is a mingling of the two within our prophets, certainly.
You know, as I'm reading it, one of the things that strikes me is that it's set for the culture of the time, right? I mean, it's very agricultural, you know, for an agrarian society. I mean, the references to all that. So if you were going to word this today, I'm just thinking of like, what are the things that would need to be destroyed and taken apart in today's language? It would be, you know, fascinating to see, you know, what would strike fear and hope in us today to have a prophet like that speak to us. Probably the
That's a beautiful, yeah, that's a beautiful question, Misty. Does this metaphor hold up in the same way today, or would we use something a little bit different?
It's hard to know. I don't know that much about this time, but it's like you have sinned, you have really messed up, and you're not automatically released from that. There will be a period almost in which you have to contemplate what you did before God is going to let you back. Not that he never will. It's that it is not going to be immediate. And I want you to think about what you've done and learn from what you've done. That's how if I was sitting there like, why am I doing this? What am I supposed to learn from here? Well, maybe I need to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it reminds me a lot. I don't know if anyone here has had the opportunity to study Rav Kook, but he uses the metaphor of the seed and how sometimes things need to disintegrate and to be allowed to nullify and be released in order that we might learn from it and something more fruitful can blossom from it. And it seems like this is a very similar metaphor to that one. Let's look. Sorry, did someone want to say something?
Yeah, I'm looking at 9.
Mm-hmm.
Assuredly by this alone, and this is what you have to do, fury unchained is pitiless wrath. Assuredly by this alone shall Jacob's sin be purged away. This is the only price for removing his guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, it's almost like you have to find out what it is you need to do. Know you're going to have to do it well before you move forward again. It's like you've gone backwards and now you're trying to get up.
Absolutely. And I want us to look at this metaphor that Jay, you pointed out about the altar stones. Okay. So what do altar stones represent? What are they used for?
For worship?
For worship. Yeah. As a way to pray to God. Right. So here saying he shall make these altar stones, these very things used for worship, like shattered blocks of chalk, meaning they're worthless, they're meaningless. That's what they become. He shall make them like that. Why would God turn altar stones into blocks of chalk?
Nullify the purpose of the stone.
Okay. Yeah, it completely and totally nullifies the purpose of the stone to be able to do that. And it might seem like, why would that happen? Doesn't God want worship? Doesn't God want these stones to be used to praise God? Wouldn't that be the very thing that would help people to connect in a meaningful way to their faith and to be able to hold on to what is most important? But this text says, no, it actually isn't in this case. So why would that be? What would have to happen for God to say, I want these stones to be shattered like blocks of chalk?
Because people were worshiping to the stone more, I think, like maybe they're putting more into the worshiping at an altar and not worshiping to God directly, I guess, having a personal relationship. That's what I might take.
Yeah, so we're going to return to this kind of a theme because I think this is what our Haftarah is truly all about. What it seems like we're doing on the outside is not always what we're doing on the inside. Sometimes we do things for show. Sometimes the actual actions of what we're doing has the exact opposite effect. And so are we actually worshiping? Is what we're doing actually helpful? Or are we doing something to pat ourselves on the back while acting in ways that are completely contrary to what our faith and our tradition tells us? There's a kind of hypocrisy that I think Isaiah is trying to point out within our tradition to get us, or to get the Jewish people at this time, to really think deeply about what is being done and why it is being done. Which is not an easy thing for a prophet to do. Yeah, go ahead.
Every once in a while, society needs a kick in the butt to remind them. So, and we drift away. We get too complacent, and especially when things are going okay, and we have to be reminded that of the right track or what we should be thinking and doing.
100%, yeah. And Isaiah is trying to do exactly that. So let's look a little more deeply at some of the wording, some of the commentary based on these verses. The very first verse about Jacob, and we're going to get back to this metaphor of Jacob and all of the plants metaphors. It says, those who came, who Jacob caused to take root. Do you not know what I did at first? Those who came to Egypt, which Jacob caused to take root, flourished and blossomed there until they filled the face of the world with fruitage. So everything that you have today, it took root because of God. This is the I here is referring to God, what God did through the words of Isaiah. Like, don't remember where you came from, what the purpose at the beginning was all about. We go a little bit further, and actually I'm going to bring us up to the Hebrew. This is 27, verse 7. These words that Rabbi Catherine so beautifully read, right? Was he beaten as his beater has been? And if we look at the Hebrew, verse 7, here we go. So it is the same Hebrew root 3 times in a row, right? Hakmakat, Mekehu, Hikahu. So was he beaten as his beater has been beaten is really what it is. How many times do you say the same word in a row, right? What is this referring to? And there's no one answer here of what this is referring to, by the way. The rabbis argue with one another about this. Who is the beater?
I think it's the Israelites.
Okay, so Maybe so the Israelites, who are they beating?
Themselves.
Okay, so maybe the Israelites are kind of beating themselves. They're getting in their own way. Yeah, that could be one way to read this, especially the upper classes versus the lower classes, because Isaiah has a lot of criticism for the upper classes within the Israelite community. Another way of reading it is that it's the Assyrians. The Assyrians are beating the Jewish people in the north, right? The northern kingdom is falling to the Assyrians. And this is saying, well, the Assyrians will get what's coming to them, right? Another way to understand this is with the Egyptians, because we remember that this is the Haftarah for Parashat Shemot, the portion in which our people are enslaved. So the Egyptians are beating our people, and one day they will be able to overcome them. So there's a lot of different layers to this, bringing in our Torah portion, bringing in our Haftarah, and perhaps bringing in some of the circumstances that are existing within Israelite society as a whole. Does he suffer such slaughter as his slayers? We have a lot of alliteration going on here, and it's not exactly the same in the Hebrew as it is the English, but this translation, I think, is trying to point out so much of the poetry that exists within the Hebrew. Okay, let's go down just a little bit more. And then there's also this theme toward the end of this verse about bringing people together. And that day, the Eternal will beat out the peoples like grain from the channel of the Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt, and you shall be picked up one by one, O children of Israel. So there's an idea of bringing everyone together and picking them together as if one picks olives from a tree, which is kind of an interesting metaphor that Rashi brings in here. So, a couple of different things, right? We saw, and we pointed out already, that the text alternates between hope and punishment, and also that the threats and promises are often expressed through imagery of like botanic imagery, essentially. So what does this botanic metaphor add to Isaiah's message, and what does it teach about the nature of uncertainty, punishment, and hope? Tiny little questions to consider here, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps that living life in itself is fragile, almost like that which is sacred is fragile if we don't pay attention, be responsible, do the mitzvot and take care of one another and ourselves. And that much like the plants of the world, if you will, they're easily destroyed. They're strong. They really are. They can sometimes withstand harsh weather, etc., but they're fragile. And so maybe we're being told, maybe Isaiah is trying to let us know about our responsibility, perhaps. I might be off on a tangent. I'm not sure.
No, I think that was brilliant, because if we don't pay attention, like there are plants that are so incredibly resilient and strong, but if we never pay them attention, if we take them for granted, if we let it just go on without watering or even the slightest attention, even the hardiest plants will eventually die. Right? And then sometimes with a little bit of attention, even a sick plant can come back to life and blossom as it hadn't for many, many years. So that metaphor is there for a reason. Yeah, anyone else?
I'm really going back and forth as who was the beater in 7? Was he beaten? He being the Jew or Jews, as his beater has been. Someone beat the beater. Is there an insinuation that Jews got arrogant at some point and did this, or that the beater themselves had been for a very long period of time very mistreated?
Oh, interesting. So you were taking it in a different kind of way. The way that the way that a lot of the rabbis, Kimchi, Rashi, and so on saw it was more the people who had been doing the beating, like the Assyrians or the Egyptians, would face punishments for their actions. But you're going back in time and saying, well, why did that person turn into a beater to begin with? And that's a really interesting question.
And did we have some part in that? I mean, we are being castigated for our arrogance through this as far as so, but we aren't seeing what it was. It's assumed that we know. I don't know.
Or it's giving us rhetorical questions to kind of grapple with.
Yeah. But God has made...
Sometimes the questions are better than the answers.
It's true. Right? If the message of this is to tell us, pay attention, don't take things for granted, don't do something for the sake of doing it, then having these ambiguous texts forces us to pay attention in a way and ask questions like that beautiful question you just asked, Rabbi Catherine, that perhaps we might not automatically ask.
Well, and this is clear in 6, just above that, that Jacob will strike root. We will sprout, we'll blossom, and the face of the world shall be covered with fruit. And I'm wondering if that's because the people who are taking care of the fruit and that type of work and the cattle and that, they're not usually the people who are with the whips, and they are not usually the people who engage in war. Somebody has to stay home and make food available. So there is a, if that is the group of people we are talking about, then it really changes the whole sense of it. You're not dealing with soldiers, you're dealing with farmers. If that is the way he means it to be beating. Clearly we have been, overstepping what we should be doing, and we need to stop and think about it. And there needs to be not that it's, oh, poor me, this only happens to me. Well, maybe there's a reason.
Yeah, and your words bring up something that Isaiah is trying to get across, because we're at a time when society has become so militaristic, and understandably militaristic, right? Because there's these two kings in the north and the south who have taken over, and there's been so much turmoil over the past 200 years, ever since the split of the kingdoms, right? We know that. And so here we have a society that is so worried about war and ego and who's going to take power and so on. I know we can't relate to this at all in current world, right? But here is Isaiah saying, cut it out. That is not what's most important. Tend to your people, tend to your values, tend to your morality. That's going to be what saves you. And there's a lot of other metaphors there that we're going to come back to with Israel and Jacob, and blossoming and fruit. Not quite there yet, but I will take us there shortly. Any other comments or questions about this text before we move into the next piece?
Just a comment on our own history. 100 years ago, we had the Roaring '20s, and everybody was just raving and carrying on and having the best time of life, followed by the worst time in our history, depression.
Yeah.
So something had to change, and it took a great deal of effort. And if you think of it in the light of our present day, what is this saying to us today? Where are we today? We're under a great deal of pressure right now. And there's so much negativity out there, and you sort of have to look for avenues of unity in a positive way. Everything ebbs and flows, even anti-Semitism goes under the covered, you know, and there, but not so overt. And now all of a sudden, in the last few years, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And you know, so it's a time that as a community we have to think and consider what might be an approach to, based on what we read. How do we look for hope and promise in this?
Yeah, I mean, Isaiah is essentially saying the reason that things got so bad is because we allowed them to get so bad, right? That when something happened, when there were all sorts of issues going on within society, rather than addressing it, rather than being strong at that point, we kind of allowed that to happen. We allowed a cancer to grow until it got to a place that worse things happened. And now Isaiah is saying it's time to tend to it. It's time to figure it out so that we can go forward in a more positive way. It's not just going to happen on its own.
Do you think that if people during the Spanish Inquisition, when Jews couldn't be Jewish and practice their faith, if they were reading this Haftarah portion, that it could help them survive emotionally because so much had been taken from them because they couldn't practice their faith and they had to hide so much, that there were lessons that they could still learn from thanks to this?
Yeah, I think we're going to get to one in just a moment. I think that for people in times of real challenge, this text is comforting. For people who think that everything is going hunky-dory and who don't want to be bothered, this text is threatening. It's comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. That's what this text is. That is what Isaiah is all about. And so I want us to look at that. I'm going to bring us forward a little bit. And it's not going to be totally clear why I'm doing so yet, but it has something to do with these highlighted words that we're going to see in this section and the section to come. Okay. So let's just read this in the English first. Does anyone want to do that?
Sure.
Thank you so much, Jay.
The proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is but wilted flowers, on the heads of men bloated with rich food, who are overcome with wine. Lo, my eternal has something strong and mighty, like a storm of hail, a shower of pestilence, something like a storm of massive torrential rain, shall be hurled with force to the ground. Trampled underfoot shall be the proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim, the wilted flowers on the heads of men bloated with rich food. That are his glorious beauty. They shall be like an early fig before the fruit harvest. Whoever sees it devours it while it is still in his hand.
Okay, so Ephraim, thank you so much, Jay. Ephraim is referring to the north country, which is, being taken over by Assyrians. And Isaiah is really criticizing the upper class of Israel and is saying, you are living in a way that is losing sight of what really matters, right? Does anything else stand out to you from these verses, or any questions or thoughts on them?
I like that it's going after the arrogant, not going after, but it's making a point to point out the arrogance of people, that I really like. So just want to say that.
Yeah. You're out there enjoying life, but you're losing sight, right? And this word that you see highlighted in blue, Svi Tifarato, this word stands for like beauty. That's what it is. And we'll see it appear in a variety of different ways within our text. In both of these cases, it's connected with Tiferet, which means beauty. So it was translated here as glorious beauty and Here, well, we're in verse 4. Here is glorious beauty as well. That went down. Sorry. Okay, so in both cases, it's pointing out that these people are trying to live their lives with as much glorious beauty as possible. And we go down a little bit. Okay. Verses 5 and 6, it continues. I'm just going to read this quickly. In that day, the Lord of hosts shall become a crown of beauty. Here we have again, Svi. We have Tiferet right there, or Tifara rather, which is beauty. So shall become a crown of beauty and a diadem of glory for the remnant of his people, and a spirit of judgment for him, for all who sits in judgment, and of valor for all who repel attacks at the gate. So Tsevaot here, Adonai Tsevaot is one of God's name. It means God of hosts or eternal of hosts, which is referring to all of the glory and beauty that God brings into our world. So here in the text above, it's talking about the glorious beauty of all of the, privileges and food and drink and everything that the upper class is enjoying. Whereas here it's talking about God as a source of beauty. So in some ways it's differentiating these two pieces. But that's not totally where we're going. Let's go a little bit further so that we have a little more context. Does anyone want to read some of this text?
I can.
Thank you so much, Misty.
But these are also muddled by wine and dazed by liquor. Priest and prophet are muddled by liquor. They are confused by wine. They are dazed by liquor. They are muddled in their visions. They stumble in judgment. Yea, all tables are covered with vomit and filth, so that no space is left. To whom would he give instruction? To whom expound a message? To those newly weaned from milk, just taken away from the breast, that say mutter upon mutter, murmur upon murmur? Now hear, now hear.
Okay, so let's stop right there for a second. What is getting across here? What is this message?
Well, to me, it sounds like, especially the priest and the prophet are way off track, and they're leading the people astray. And what I keep hearing over and over is that sense of accountability. God is going to hold you accountable. So you may live, very wealthy and be blind to the inequities around you, but you will be held accountable.
Yeah, thank you, Missy. Yeah, Frank, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I was going to say this is right down my alley. They sound like a bunch of alcoholics.
Does sound that way, yeah.
Yeah, and then their judgment is off. Your ego is, if you're an alcoholic, your ego more controls your thinking. So, this really reads a lot to me about not just just what comes along with that. Where he's saying, basically pointing out they're drunks and they're throwing up. I mean, it's pretty bad. So, that's what I get out of it.
Yeah, and even if we use that as a metaphor, even if it wasn't actual wine, which the text says that it definitely was, right? It's clear that they are so overtaken with their perspective that it has completely damaged their judgment, right? They don't even see what they're doing wrong. They're so into it that they can't even see that there's a problem. And that's really, really important here, that message. There's just a little bit more text here. And you'll see that there's also a lot of repetition in this particular text. Misty, do you want to continue and read the last verses for us?
Sure. Truly, I stopped at truly, right?
Yes, that's right.
Truly, as one who speaks to that people in a stammering jargon and an alien tongue, is he who declares to them, this is the resting place. Let the weary rest. This is the place of repose. They refuse to listen. To them, the word of the Lord is mutter upon mutter, murmur upon murmur, now here, now there. And so they will march, but they shall fall backward and be injured and snared and captured.
Okay, so where is this going at the end?
Their downfall.
Their downfall, because they're not understanding. Mutter upon mutter, murmur upon murmur. So I want us to look at that Hebrew, okay? And that's the Hebrew that is in the blue right here. And we see it a couple of times, right? Sav, letzav, tzav, letzav. And here again, sav, letzav, tzav, letzav. Now, I want to just point out, so in his Haftarah Torah commentary, Michael Fishbane points out that sound clusters often reinforce thematic polarities, and that is what is going on here. So in this Haftarah, we see examples of sav and also sav. The first refers to beauty, or the god of hosts. The second refers to babbles or murmurs. This word is used as Isaiah criticizes Ephraim's folly. As Fishbane explains, the contrast is particularly apt. Sorry, that should say apt, not apter, apter, or whatever, for the people's inability to hear God's word leads to the wilting of their glory and the crushing of their crowns. They think that they're doing what's right because they're having a good time, because they are enjoying the beauties of the world. But the beauties of the world don't exist in just great food and drink. Sure, they can. Nothing wrong with enjoying some good food and drink, right? But if you lose sight of all morality, if you lose sight of what is right and what is just, and all you do is try to enjoy your privilege in this world, well, that's not going to serve the community very well, is it? Right? There's responsibilities that go along with that joy. And that's really a powerful message within this text. Don't just do things for the sake of doing them. Don't just, go out and enjoy yourself and have a good time because it's nice to have a good time. You need to also lean into responsibility of what it means to be a person of privilege is to have responsibility to bring what's good to others as well. So there's a commentary called the Women's Haftarah commentary that came out many years ago, and URJ is actually, or CCAR Press is actually coming out with a new Haftarah commentary next month, which I'm planning on bringing into our class as soon as it does come out. But within the Women's Haftarah commentary, Sharon Brous actually wrote a short piece about this portion. And what she says is, in Haftarah Shemot, Isaiah speaks to the sense of estrangement. He articulates the great promise that the nation will be transformed from being Jacob, afraid or incapable of fulfilling its potential, systemically undermining itself, to being Israel, self-actualizing, living in full dignity. Isaiah describes Jacob as a flower, the root of which is invisible to passerby and therefore trampled by history. Yet the very root will become the source of redemption, blossoming into the catalyst for all change in the world. So she's pointing something that we're going to be coming back to again in a minute, but that very first verse, I'll go back up to it so we can see it. Okay, that very first verse, right? Jacob shall strike root, Israel shall sprout and blossom, in the face of the world shall be covered with fruit. That Jacob really wrestled. We know the name Yisrael means to wrestle with God, right? That this is speaking to a people that has been worn down, that is being overcome by Assyrians, that is really struggling within themselves. And she's saying there is a way forward. There is a way to blossom and to take root. There is a way to live into the truth of who we are. That's what she's saying here. Sorry if this is making anyone dizzy, this going back and forth. And I want us to hold on to that. All of these pieces are going to come together. I just need a minute to get us there. So when we look at the last verses of our Haftarah portion, we do so from this perspective of hope, of what it is that we can become if we lean into that change, if we are courageous enough to wrestle with ourselves and to wrestle with God. The Eternal will first afflict and then heal the Egyptians when they turn back to the Eternal. He will respond to their entreaties and heal them. In that day, there shall be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. The Assyrians will join with the Egyptians, and the Egyptians with the Assyrians, and then the Egyptians together with the Syrians shall serve God. This verse here is pointing to a world without strife, a world without any sort of enslavement, a world in which even the Egyptians and the Assyrians will come to serve God. In our portion, this does relate to a little piece from our Torah portion as well, which is kind of a precursor of what's to come in the story of the Exodus. That it says that one day, we look at verse 21, I'm just going to skip ahead to there. I will dispose the Egyptians favorably toward this people. So this is the Torah portion just as bondage in Egypt is beginning. But even now, God is kind of setting a framework around it, that one day God will dispose the Egyptians favorably toward this people, so that when you go, you will not go away empty-handed. Each woman shall borrow from her neighbor and the lodger in her house objects of silver and gold and clothing, and you shall put these on your sons and daughters, just stripping the Egyptians. That one day the Egyptians will recognize the wrong that has been done to the Israelites and will do an act of love and giving gifts so that the Israelites will be okay. So it kind of goes back to this verse of, remember that just because a people did something wrong, just because you did something wrong does not mean you will always face punishment. There is a more positive future ahead if you choose to lean into it, but it will take some time to get there, and it will take some sacrifice, and it will take some work. Any questions or thoughts before I bring a few other things together?
I'm thinking about that pivot where it says that God wanted to pass on information that would usually go, I don't remember where it is because I've been flipping pages, so that God wants to continue to educate us, always continuing to educate us, because life is not static. And right after that, that's where the description is that the people, the priests, whoever they are just busy getting stone drunk. It's not possible to teach them or to bring us forward. We're just gone. And it must have been so, I mean, think how it is if you've ever tried to teach someone and they're just drunk, or lived with someone like that. It is extremely frustrating.
Yeah, you can bring someone to water, you can't make them drink, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's God wanting to pass it on, and this is supposed to be the cream of the cream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is saying, take responsibility, tend to, what is most important, tend to the crops so that they can blossom and bloom again. Do what you need to do so that everyone can live according to God's will and be in a safer and better place as a people. But Isaiah really is pointing that finger in all directions and saying, we all have to do this, right? God is giving us an open door. Take it. It's there. God will be there with open arms when we go through, And that can be going back to, like, Marla, what you were talking about before, right? Like, for someone who's going through a really, really hard time, Well, you can't affect the forces on the outside, but what you can do is live with integrity now, and believe that what is most important will sustain you until ultimately God will overcome these negative forces and there will be a better future. Trying to decide what order to do these two texts in. I keep going back and forth between the two. I guess I'll do Itere Torah first. So there's a Hasidic commentator named Pinchas of Koretz, who showed or highlighted how one should be wholehearted with the eternal your God. The text that we just looked at, right? All of these upper class people are not being wholehearted with God. They're just enjoying drinks and doing their thing. They're not paying attention to anything else of their responsibilities, right? They're doing none of that. So this commentator explained the value of God's presence in performing the sacred obligation because it's easy to fool others, right? It's possible to just stand up there in front of everyone and saying, yeah, I'm doing what's right. A person can act purely innocent and yet be involved in all sorts of devilish schemes. Or that person can pose as the most humble of all while pride rages within him. The Torah stresses that one may be able to fool others, but in the end, one cannot fool God. The reckoning will come sooner or later. So this text is really a call to be true, to be honest, to live into values. Doesn't matter what you show to the world. What matters is how you're actually acting. So I want to bring it all together with this text by Rabbi Sharon Brous, where she said, Isaiah's promise of Israel's escape from degradation, both within the society where Assyria is overcoming them and so on. It's brilliantly juxtaposed to the corresponding Torah portion, Parashat Shemot. In the exact moment in which we read about Israel's descent into slavery in Egypt, with the words, let us deal harshly with them so that they may not increase. At that very moment where the yoke of all of that is on our shoulders, this Haftarah offers a prophetic vision of a people that's redeemed, living in a world in which torment and affliction are but a memory. The days are coming when Jacob will take root and Israel will bud and blossom and fill the face of the earth like fruit. Going back to that first verse, right? Where Jacob will be able to come all of those things, will wrestle with God and will actually come out with a blessing. So the prophet dares us to dream that the world will one day look different than it does today, compelling us to envision an existence that unburdened by grief and anguish. And he instructs us that the only way to preserve faith in this dream is to refuse to succumb to despair, despite the profound sense of loss. Precisely as the story of our national trauma begins to unfold in Shemot, Isaiah forces us to imagine the unimaginable, that our debilitating exile will end in a massive ingathering, a celebration of the promise of freedom fulfilled. So, Marla, how do you think Jews living in Spain would see this based on, and this isn't just for you, I'm just responding to your question earlier on about how that would have been viewed. How do you think that they would see it? Do you think they would see it the way that Rabbi Brous is pointing out here?
Well, for their sake, one would hope so. But given a situation where you might be stripped of all that you have enjoyed and loved, and having to hide to save your life, I can see where they might doubt this. But if it gives them a glimmer of hope that they could be able to get through it and believe that at some point they will be free, I can see it as being helpful, that future celebration. But I also want to be empathetic to them if they can't do it or couldn't do it.
Yeah. These texts are there not scolding people for how they feel or how they don't feel, but rather giving a source of inspiration when people might really need it, right? At a moment of despair, to look at this and say, wow, look at where the people were and God's promise, and we were able to overcome that. We got through that. We moved to a place of more promise, and now we're in a hard moment again, and perhaps we can get through this again. Perhaps these words will come to fruition once more, and we will be able to, if we focus on what really matters, if we stay true to who we are and what our morality tells us to do, then perhaps we can come out strong. Any other questions or thoughts here? Because there's a lot within this text. Just going to look at your faces.
Yes, I have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I just, it's kind of put me in a sad mood. I was already in a sad mood today, but it's put me in a sadder mood. Because we're talking to each other. What's the phrase they said? Preaching to the choir. You know, we're on, and looking back, I think we almost lost it before we even got started with coming out of Egypt and going to the Golden Island, the Golden Calf. Then we another time we lost it almost to the Greeks when we were so infatuated with their lifestyle and had to pull back from there. We're so assimilated now, we're getting further and further away from the Holocaust, and we're feeling pretty comfortable with ourselves. And the average Jewish person, not only that is not affiliated, they have less and less education. There were only 3 or 5% of us on record here in this country, and only a small percentage of us ever attend services or join the men's club or the Hadassah and those things. And I see us we're really in a slump at a time when we really need to get with it and reach out. I know we don't proselyte, but we have to reach out, and because just given the sense of where the nation is and the rise in anti-Semitism, there's always going to be people that hate us, but it seems now that they're unleashed. So anyway, it's I got a little emotional about this particular Haftarah. So great class, by the way.
Yeah, I want to respond to that, Irv, because I feel like every generation has said what you just said by using different words and different examples. That like people know less, they're not connecting the way that they used to, and so on. But I just want to point out that Reform Judaism is one of the only religious groups that has actually grown in its affiliation. And people might not be joining temples and joining groups in the same ways that was far more common for baby boomers and so on. But the connections that are being made are actually quite profound. They're just not in the same ways that it used to be. So I actually see a lot of promise in the future for the Jewish community, a lot of promise. And I see all the innovation and exciting things going on. I don't share that same concern that you have. I'm actually really, really excited about some of the things that we have ahead of us and how Judaism continues to grow and blossom on the shoulders of all those who have gone before us. But I think that what Isaiah is speaking to isn't about services. It isn't about those rituals. It's about morality. It's about the way in which we treat one another. And he's saying that it's so easy to rest on our laurels. It's so easy to say, oh, we're a people. God gave us these things. Yeah, we pretty much follow it. It's cool. We're good. And Isaiah is saying, you don't get to say that ever, right? You always have to pay attention. I could say like this coming weekend is Martin Luther King weekend, right? Where we're remembering the absolute courage and horror faced by so many people in fighting for rights, people based on the color of their skin, And it can be so easy for us to pat ourselves on the back and say, yeah, we're in a better place now. All is good. Like, we don't really need to think about this. We can celebrate all of the good that we've done. We can sing a couple songs. We can all come together and just rejoice that we've made progress. Isaiah is saying, you don't get to do that. That's not what this is about. This is about challenging us to think deeply. Does slavery still exist within our society? Is there racism in our society? How do we continue to build upon the values that we've learned with those who went before us so that we can create an even more just and equitable world? That's the message of this portion. Don't stop. Don't pat yourself on the back. Keep on going. I don't know if that puts you in any better of a mood, Irv, but that's what I get from Isaiah.
It cheered me up. Thank you.
Anyone else have any other thoughts or comments here as we close up our Haftarah study today?
Well,
One of the things, go ahead, Catherine.
I think you just pointed out beautifully that sometimes when you become comfortable, you become very, very arrogant. And you added in that verse from the song, it's standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. We are the shoulders of those who will come after us also.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, Marla, what did you want to say?
I was just thinking, given the reading from one of our texts for the class we're taking at Temple Bethel, reminded of something that I was learning about being Jewish, and that is this whole notion of ongoing study and taking these classes and asking the questions. Like even the beginning of our lesson today, there were probably more questions than there were answers, but that's our responsibility as Jews. And the more we study all these various texts and gain understanding, I think we make the world a better place, because then oftentimes we can take what we've just learned and apply it to the here and now. And it was very validating to me, like what's the difference between a person who is observant in the sense that they always go to services or they always like Shabbat count. I was trying to make sense of all the differences and how people behave Jewishly. And the one thing that the book emphasizes is our obligation to study. That really resonated. And today's study was more meaningful to me today because we were able to figure out what was going on perhaps at the time this was being read by folks. It put meaning to this. I really enjoyed today.
Thank you. I hope that all of us gives us some food for thought so that we can continue to blossom and nurture within so that we can grow. So thank you so much for being here, for being a part of this. And next week we'll come back with the next Haftarah. Thank you, everyone.